I welcome you to Honorable Vice President's lecture on India's position in the world. I would like to invite Honorable Rector András Lánci to give his opening speech.
His Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor and pleasure to have His Excellency, the Vice President of India, and all the members of your delegation here at the Corvinus University of Budapest. We are proud that our university is a place where distinguished guests from all over the world, scholars, business leaders, political leaders, can feel at home. A place where people can come together to discuss the issues of the world in an atmosphere based on openness, curiosity, and honesty. Today's lecture is another event in this cherished tradition of our university. His Excellency will be speaking about the achievements and challenges of Indian democracy. We all know that being free is not easy, neither in our personal life and nor in the life of communities. Being free is about finding a balance between our opportunities and our limitations, between our rights and our responsibilities, between our desires and our virtues. It is a privilege that we have the chance to hear the perspective on freedom of such an experienced statesman as His Excellency. India has 800 million eligible voters out of the total 1.2 billion population of India, a condition that is very difficult for us, the members of a much smaller community with 8 million voters, to imagine what it means to maintain the world's largest democracy. I do believe that the people of India and Hungary have much to learn from each other. Learn from the achievements and learn from the challenges. We know that India's economy is the fastest growing in the world currently and has a young population. We also know that India, which is the largest importer of oil, has benefited from recent cheap oil prices. Yet India currently is 81st on global competitive ranking and has big challenges in the fields of healthcare and education. We also know that the workforce of India consists of relatively low proportion of trained employees. Thus, education will have a decisive role in the formation of India's future. Another interesting fact about India is that India has a rapidly growing middle class. All this data suggests to us that India, although immeasurably bigger than Hungary, has to face very similar problems like we do here in Hungary. I am sure His Excellency's visit to Hungary and lecture contribute to the friendship of India and Hungary. No friendship is real without intellectual connections. Therefore, institutions of culture and intellect have to be at the forefront of these relationships. This university will certainly do its share in this work. Corvinus University of Budapest is one of the most prestigious universities of Hungary and will be one of the most well-known universities in Central Europe. This university is going to celebrate its 100th anniversary. It is a past that has been coeval with the rise of modern social sciences. We are dedicated to understand the springs of modern economic and social development. We wish to research and teach our research findings to both home and international students in terms of economic, political, and social factors of development. We are more than open to welcome students and scholars from India, and we will encourage our students and scholars to be active in finding Indian partners for the projects. Once again, I would like to thank His Excellency for your visit and your lecture.
Thank you.
Honorable Rector, thank you very much.
My turn.
Now I would like to invite Dr. László Szabó to present his opening comments.
Sorry,
Your Excellency, Mr. Hamid Ansari, dear distinguished guests, on behalf of the Hungarian government and as the co-chair of the Indian-Hungarian Joint Economic Committee, I would like to welcome you at this precious occasion. Let me start with a quote from Rabindranath Tagore. I'm pretty sure that many of you know him and his work. In this quote he said, "You cannot cross the sea by just standing at the water and staring at it." I don't know whether he was looking at Lake Balaton at that time when he made this comment, but this is certainly a thought that we can certainly philosophize about it. The spirit of India and the fact that India has regained its liberty just a few years before the Hungarian Revolution broke out 60 years ago, exactly in this building and in the neighborhood, I believe this clearly gives us something in common. The fact that India's embassy played a pivotal role in spreading the news about Hungary's uprising against the Stalinist regime is clearly an example of how friendly and how partnery this relationship is between our countries. India, as one of the, actually the most populous country that believes in democracy and that drives its political processes through democratic regime, is clearly an example to the whole world. I believe what we have in common here and what we discussed yesterday in the presence of His Excellency and Prime Minister Orbán clearly gives us a lot of shared values. India has become one of the largest investors of Hungary, the largest greenfield investor last year and the year before. Clearly shows that India has a lot of open heart and trust towards Hungary. I think we can only serve this trust with mutually beneficial agreements, partnership, friendship. Over the last few centuries, Hungarian scholars and scientists and travelers went to India to search for our history, for our origin. And quite clearly it seems that lots of Indian scholars are coming our way. Luckily, more and more tourists are coming our way from India as well. And I'm pretty sure there's so much to share between each other. We can only elaborate more on this quest to improve our relationship politically, economically, and I believe there's a lot of faith involved as well. Culturally, we have a lot to offer to each other as well. So we are honored by your presence, and I'm very glad that I can personally participate in this lecture of yours. And I hope that you and your delegation have a very fruitful couple of days here in Budapest, and we really expect you to come back very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and now I would like to invite Honorable Vice President Mohammad Hamid Ansari to present his lecture to the audience.
Thank you. Thank you. The Rector of the University, Professor Andras Lanzi, faculty of the University, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am happy to be in this historic setting and in this temple of learning. Hungary and Hungarian scholars and travelers are well known in India. Foremost amongst them was Alexander Kosmodakouros. The Asiatic Society in Kolkata is proud of his association with it and has published many of his research works. His tomb in Darjeeling is a monument protected by the Archaeological Survey of India. An Indian of my generation also recalls a footnote to the events of October 1956 in this city and the role that an Indian diplomat by the name of Muhammad Rahman was destined to play in them. The gratitude of the Hungarian people was publicly acknowledged by President Arpaz Gomz on his visit to India in 1991. Hungary's journey to modern democracy took several decades after 1956 and commenced only in 1990. As a form of government for the people, by the people, each nation's experience is sui generis. India commenced this journey many decades earlier, and I feel it may be of some use to share our perceptions and experience with this young audience. Friends, India attained its freedom from British colonial rule after a long struggle. The Indian national movement is one of the few instances in history where state power was not seized in a single moment of revolutionary change, but was obtained through a prolonged struggle that alternated between active and passive phases, and in which the constitutional space offered by the existing colonial structure was utilized without being co-opted by it. A word about the nature of Indian society is relevant to contextualize this discussion. Our population of 1.27 billion comprises of over 4,635 communities, 78% of whom are not only linguistic and cultural but social categories. Religious minorities constitute 19.4% of the population. Much of this is reflective of our cultural past. Indian culture is syncretic in character and, as a historian put it, embraces in its orbit beliefs, customs, rites, institutions, arts, religion, and philosophies belonging to different stratas of societies in varying stages of development. It eternally seeks to find a unity for the heterogeneous elements which make up its totality. It is a veritable human laboratory where the crossbreeding of ideas, beliefs, and cultural traditions has been in progress for a few thousand years. The national movement recognized this cultural plurality and sought to base a national identity on it. Thus, well before the actual attainment of freedom on August 15, 1947, our people were prepared psychologically and ideologically for self-rule in a democratic format. This was spelt out in the Objectives Resolution of December 1946, stipulating that all power and authority of independent India shall be derived from the people and would guarantee some basic rights to citizens. The principles enunciated in this document were amplified in the Constitution of India of November 1949 and made operative in January 1950. It stipulated universal adult franchise. Its basic principles were summed up in a brief and pithy form in the preamble. Its sections on fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy made it a socio-economic manifesto. In other words, the superstructure of a democratic polity and a secular state structure put in place in modern India is anchored in the existential reality of a plural society. The first general election was held in 1951. 173 million citizens were qualified to vote. Of these, 44.87% exercised their franchise. 1,874 candidates belonging to different national and regional parties contested. Then, more than 6 decades later, in the 16th general election in the year 2014, the size of the electorate had increased to 814 million. The voting percentage had gone up to 66.4%, and of these, 67.9% were women and 65.6%. I beg your pardon, 67.9% were men and 65.6% were women. The number of contestants was 8,251. The institutional structure for the preparation of electoral rolls and for the conduct of parliamentary and state assembly elections is the responsibility of the Election Commission, a constitutional body whose members hold office for 6 years and cannot be removed except by a process similar to that for the removal of a judge of the Supreme Court of India. Since the year 2004, votes are recorded through EVMs or the electronic voting machines. These are manufactured in India and their accuracy and secrecy has been fully tested. Our electoral system, commonly known as FPTP or the first past the post system, is a single member district, simple plurality system in which voters over the age of 18 years since 1989 cast a single ballot to choose a single representative to the lower house of parliament or the state assemblies. The candidates with the largest number of votes, even if only a plurality, getting elected to represent the constituency. India is unquestionably the world's largest democracy. Its singular merit lies in its success in providing space for political contestation and an opportunity for the articulation of a variety of claims. This has facilitated accommodation of groups and regional demands in a complex quasi-federal polity. Our people at all levels of society have imbibed the democratic process enthusiastically, and through the amendments to the Constitution in 1992, extended it to the municipalities and village councils, or what we call panchayats. The democratic process has brought about a shift of political power from the middle and higher castes and classes of urban society to backward classes who are now politically the most influential ones in the country. They have won reservations for themselves in legislatures and government services, as were accorded to the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes after independence through constitutional provisions. There are few examples in recent history of such a conspicuous shift of political power involving such a huge mass of population taking place in such a short time almost without any violence and in a democratic way. This is one more example of the miracles that democracy can create. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is much to celebrate much to be proud of. At the same time, living societies also introspect from time to time, recall their foundational principles, and assess the work still to be done. These, in India's case, are inscribed in the preamble and the text of the Constitution. They were amplified in the concluding statement of Bhimrao Ambedkar, the man who chaired the drafting committee, and I quote him. On the 26th of January 1950, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reasons of our social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? If we continue to deny it for long, we will do so only by putting our political democracy in peril. We must remove this contradiction at the earliest possible moment, or else those who suffer from inequality will blow up the structure of political democracy which this assembly has so laboriously built up. This is the end of the quote. This challenge of securing substantive equality for citizens and thereby ensuring fraternity for the unity and integrity of the nation remains work in progress. It has been argued that inequality traps prevent the marginalized and work in favor of the dominant groups in society, and that unequal opportunities lead to unequal outcomes, which in turn lead to unequal access to political power. This creates a vicious circle, since unequal power structure determines the nature and functioning of the institutions and their policies. The requirement of bridging vertical and horizontal developmental gaps is accepted as valid, but in varying degrees, by all segments of opinion, and is sought to be addressed through strategies of inclusive development. The government accords it high priority in its socio-economic policies. The pace of its realization remains a matter of debate. The mechanics of the functioning of our electoral system has been the subject of critical scrutiny for many years, pursuant to a realization that aberrations have crept in. In the year 2011, the Supreme Court of India directed the Law Commission, an expert body charged with the responsibility of proposing legal reforms, to suggest correctives on two of the identified malpractices. Its report was followed by extensive national consultations. Pursuant to it, the Commission gave another report focused on 1. Election finance, 2. Regulation of political parties and inner party democracy, 3. Proportional representation, 4. Compulsory voting, 5. The right to recall, 6. Opinion polls, 7. Political advertisements, and several other matters pertaining to elections. On the state funding for elections, the Election Commission of India is of the view that unless radical reforms are carried out in election campaign and political finance, state funding should not be allowed, as it will not be possible to prohibit or check a candidate's own expenditure or expenditure by others over and above that which is provided by the state. A critical question about the first past the post system of elections relates to the representativeness of the elected representative. In the 2014 general election, only 117 of the 539 winning candidates in the House of the People secured 50% or more of the votes cast. This, in the context of the overall national voting percentage of 66.4, makes evident the actual representativeness of the elected member of parliament. One study shows that it was 31%. On the other hand, the first past the post system has the merit of being uncomplicated, since it uses single member districts and candidate centered voting, and gives to voters a clear choice between candidates and parties. For this reason, the Supreme Court of India characterized it as having, and I quote the judgment, the merit of preponderance of decisiveness over representation, end of quote. On the other hand, this system produces a discrepancy between voter share in results. It also results in the exclusion of small or regional parties in the legislature. This is accentuated by the unequal presence of the weaker sections, especially women and minorities. At the same time, the first past the post system has not been able to uphold majoritarianism in a multi-party system, since the winning candidate often wins only about 20 to 30% of the votes. The debate on this, as on other matters listed in the Law Commission's report, continues. Different segments of political opinion view the proposed changes differently and are unlikely to develop a consensus at an early date. Among other challenges in the path of a more comprehensive democracy is the question of gender balance. Women members of parliament constitute only 11% of the total in the House of the People elected in 2014. Some, but not all, of the religious minorities are in the same position. Both require to be attended to through strategies of affirmative action. Though gender equality has been ensured through legislation in municipalities and village panchayats, the same has not been done for parliament and state assemblies. Another paradox needs to be mentioned. Record shows that while the public participation in the electoral exercise has noticeably improved, public dissatisfaction from the functioning of elected bodies is breeding cynicism with the democratic process itself. The imperative of a corrective is evident to reinforce public confidence in the ability of the system to deliver as intended. It is evident that the quest for improvements will continue with the growth of public awareness of the electoral process. An observer on the Indian scene has noted that the ethos of democracy expresses itself in the freedom of expression, respect for human rights, good governance, pluralism, and mutual understanding. Adding that a participatory democracy today is only possible through the active participation of citizens' initiatives. Evidence of this in the case of India is to be found in the new social movements that mobilize large masses and in the process create space for political action that have a transformative capacity. The impulses and the processes generated by these movements add vigor to Indian democracy. Thank you. I hope I made sense to a professor of political science.
Thank you, Honorable Vice President, for this lecture on global achievements of Indian democracy. Now looking at Ambassador Jabra, we have 7 minutes left, so I may ask a question then. We got questions from the audience, and I would like to ask, in what way can India adapt to growing geopolitical shifts, which include Russia, the United States, and China? And I may add the current situation of the European Union. Thank you.
It has never been the Indian philosophy or the Indian approach to think of the world in terms of groupings or blocks. There's an old Indian saying, the whole world is a family. And therefore, we have, since our independence, approached the world beyond our frontiers as one world, rather than world divided into segments here or there. So we would not be in favor of blocks, old or new, and we would rather like to focus on the global agenda, which is becoming more and more evident and which cannot be addressed in segments. It either has to be addressed as a totality or it will fall by the wayside. Thank you.
I think we have time for another question.
Please do.
It's about how will India tackle global warming and reducing carbon dioxide emissions?
About an hour back, I happened to be discussing this very matter with His Excellency the President of Hungary. Global warming is a fact. Pollution of atmosphere is a fact. But it is also a fact that India has not been a major or even a minor contributor to it. If you look at the statistical data, our contribution to creating this state of affairs has been minuscule. Nevertheless, as global citizens and as part of this world, we have to share the responsibility within our capacity to try to solve the problem of global warming and in reducing pollutions. The agreement that was signed in Paris, which we ratified very recently, is part of the exercise. Some of you would recall that global attention on this really started a long time back. There was a conference in Copenhagen in 1973, I think. Am I right? 72 or 73? Stockholm, sorry. Yes, Stockholm. Then there was the famous Rio gathering of 1992. We have made plans. We have followed up those plans with more detailed arrangements, protocols, commitments. But implementation has been tardy. And implementation has been tardy because the major polluters, and I shall not name them, have not been prepared to take the initiative to correct. Each one of us has to contribute. I contribute to my capacity, but I expect all others to contribute to their capacity. That is our approach. We do see this as a major threat to the existence of mankind, and we hope that everybody will take part in it.
Unfortunately, we ran out of time, so at the end I would like to thank you again on behalf of the university, your lecture, and we do hope to continue to foster strong scientific and academic cooperation with your country in the future. Thank you very much, Honorable Vice President.